There's a moment in every empath's life when something quietly breaks. It doesn't shatter with noise or dramate cracks in silence. You've spent years loving deeply, listening endlessly, and giving more than anyone ever asked for. You weren't just being kind, you were absorbing. You took in other people's sadness like it was your own. Their anger, their chaos, their confusion, you held it all, thinking love meant carrying the weight they refused to deal with. But here's the truth. That kind of empathy, unchecked, becomes a trap. You believed that if you loved harder, they'd finally heal. That if you stayed, they'd see your worth. But instead, your love became fuel for their control. You found yourself apologizing for emotions you didn't create, questioning your sanity in arguments that made no sense, walking on eggshells just to keep the peace. And still, it wasn't enough. Because for the narcissist, nothing ever is. What they wanted wasn't love, it was power, disguised as intimacy. You felt it, didn't you? That moment when the exhaustion hit not just your body but your soul, when even breathing felt like effort. When your smile faded not because you were sad, but because you were numb. Emotional burnout isn't loud. It's quiet detachment. You stop reacting not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Your nervous system, tired of being on high alert, finally pulls the plug. That's when you know you're done. But here's the beauty. That breaking point is actually a beginning. Because when you stop trying to save someone who never intended to be saved, you turn that attention inward. You begin to ask, who am I without this chaos? What do I feel when I'm not absorbing someone else's storm? That question is the first crack of light. And though it might start in exhaustion, it ends in awakening. Because the empath's breaking point isn't failure, it's clarity. And once you taste that peace, even for a second, you'll never go back. Not ever. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This isn't just philosophy. It's the core of what happens in every empath-narcissist relationship. Because when you, the empath, meet the narcissist, you're not just meeting a person. You're standing in front of a mirror that's been twisted, one that shows you their shadow, not yours. The narcissist is terrified of their own darkness. Insecurity, shame, fear of inadequacy, it's all there, buried deep beneath charm, arrogance, and control. But instead of facing it, they offload it. And guess who ends up carrying it? You, the empath. Because your heart is open, you see pain and want to heal it. You feel discomfort and want to soothe it. So when they project their shadow, when they accuse you of being too emotional, too sensitive, too needy, you absorb it like it's your truth, but it never was. Jung called this projection, the unconscious act of placing our disowned parts onto others. Narcissists do it compulsively. They can't face their own flaws, so they turn them into yours. And for a while, you believe them. You carry guilt that doesn't belong to you. You shrink to make space for their chaos. You rewrite your truth to keep their lies comfortable. And slowly you disappear inside someone else's unhealed wounds. But here's what narcissists never expect. That one day, the empath wakes up. That one day, you'll stop confusing their projections with your personality. And when that day comes, everything shifts. You no longer absorb, you observe. You stop apologizing and start separating. You realize that what they called love was a smokescreen for control, and what they labeled drama was just your intuition trying to speak. This is where power begins. Not with confrontation, but with awareness. When you see the projection, you no longer carry the shame. You return it not with anger, but with silence. You reclaim what is yours and release what never was. And suddenly, the dynamic changes. Because when the mirror no longer reflects what they need to see, the narcissist panics. And that panic is your freedom. An empath doesn't just feel emotions, they reflect them. Like a still lake, they mirror back what others bring to them. That's what makes them magnetic and dangerous, especially to narcissists. Because when a narcissist looks into an empath, they don't just see kindness or love, they see themselves, the parts they've buried, the wounds they pretend don't exist, the shame, the rage, the hollowness. It all comes rushing to the surface. And that terrifies them, but it also draws them in. Narcissists are subconsciously pulled toward empaths not because they want connection, but because they crave reflection. They need someone to show them a version of themselves they can manage. At first, you do just that. You reflect their potential, their charm, their intelligence. You believe in them so deeply that for a moment, even they start to believe it. And that belief is like a drug. It feels like love, but it's a transaction. You give them identity. They give you illusion. What they don't expect is that the mirror reflects everything, not just the curated self they want to show. Over time, their darker truths rise to the surface. And you, without even meaning to, hold it up to them. That's when the game changes. Now, you're not a muse, you're a threat, because your presence forces them to confront what they've spent a lifetime avoiding. You didn't expose them with words, you exposed them by existing. This is why narcissists oscillate between idealizing you and devaluing you. Why one moment you're everything and the next, you're too much. It's not about you, it never was. It's about what they see when they're with you. And here's the secret. This is also why they keep coming back. Not because they love you, but because you reflect something they can't find anywhere else, the parts of themselves they desperately want to control, but can't. You didn't break them. You revealed them. And in that revelation, they feel both drawn and repelled. But now that you see the mirror for what it is, the question is no longer why they keep coming back. The question is, will you still be standing there when they do? There comes a moment quiet, unannounced, when the empath finally sees the pattern, not just the chaos, not just the pain, but the pattern. It's that moment when your mind plays back every conversation, every contradiction, every time you questioned your own gut, and suddenly it clicks. The puzzle you've been trying to solve wasn't love, it was manipulation. At first it feels like a betrayal, because the person you defended, explained, excused, was never really showing you love. They were showing you control, wrapped in compliments and promises that always led back to their comfort, not your safety. The arguments weren't misunderstandings, they were rehearsed. The "I love you" wasn't a vow, it was a leash. And in that moment, the world tilts. You see how often you abandoned yourself just to keep the peace. How many times you said, "It's okay," when it wasn't. How you confused loyalty with self-erasure. It's not your fault. No one teaches empaths that their love can become a weapon in the wrong hands. You only wanted to heal, to help, to hold things together, but you were never meant to bleed for balance. This is the awakening. The moment you stop blaming yourself, the moment you stop wondering what more you could have done. Because the truth is, you already did too much. You weren't lacking, you were overflowing. And they drank from that until there was almost nothing left. Almost. But not quite. Because this moment, right here, is where everything starts to change. Self-awareness replaces self-blame. You stop trying to explain chaos and start stepping out of it. You understand now that love isn't proven by endurance. It's revealed in peace. And if someone's love constantly feels like a battlefield, it was never love to begin with, it was a test, and one you no longer have to take. There is grief in this clarity, but also power, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it, and from here forward, everything will be different. Not perfect, not easy, but real. You're not broken. You're awake, and no one can take that from you again. There's a moment in every empath's journey when the deepest shift happens, not with words, not with tears, but with stillness. You don't scream, you don't argue, you don't explain yourself for the 100th time. You just disconnect, not because you don't care, but because you finally do, enough to stop letting yourself be drained. It's not coldness, it's clarity. You start to see things for what they are, not what you hoped they could be. You stop begging for breadcrumbs from someone who was always full but never fed you. You no longer chase closure from a person who builds confusion for sport. And here's what they never saw coming. When you emotionally disconnect, the narcissist loses their oxygen. Because what they've always fed on wasn't your presence, it was your reaction, your tears, your over-explaining, your desperate attempts to be understood. That energy, that effort, that emotional investment, it was the fuel they needed to stay relevant in your mind and in your soul. So when you go silent, not out of anger, but out of peace, they panic. They poke, they provoke, they test, but nothing happens. The storm they used to summon now falls flat. The guilt trips don't land. The passive-aggressive jabs don't pierce. The drama feels empty, because you're no longer holding space for someone who refused to grow. That, right there, is the one thing they cannot control. They can manipulate conversations, twist your words, gaslight your memories, but they cannot force your spirit to stay once it's already walked away, and the beauty is you don't even need to announce it. You don't need to declare, post, or warn. You just become unavailable, not physically, energetically. And when that happens, everything shifts. For the first time, you're no longer the mirror. You're no longer the container for their wounds. You've stopped being the emotional crutch they never deserved. And in doing so, you reclaim something they can never touch: your peace. This isn't revenge. This is rebirth. And it begins the moment you choose silence, not to punish them, but to protect yourself. That one thing, emotional disconnection, isn't the end of you. It's the beginning of you. Let's be clear, disconnecting emotionally is not the same as shutting down. You haven't gone numb. You haven't lost your heart. You've just stopped offering it to those who only knew how to wound it. There's a difference, and it matters. You still feel everything. You still have the depth, the sensitivity, the insight, but now your emotions flow through a cleaner channel that filters out manipulation, distortion, and chaos. This isn't the absence of emotion, it's the reclamation of emotional ownership. You are no longer an open field where anyone can trample through. You are a sacred space, and you've learned to lock the gate. For years, you may have confused boundaries with being cold. But now you know the truth. The warmest people are often the ones who've had to learn how to burn without turning to ash. You didn't stop feeling, you just stopped feeling for them. You stopped being the emotional filter for someone who weaponized your compassion. And here's where the shift becomes irreversible. You stop justifying their behavior. You stop rationalizing their moods, translating their cruelty, or excusing their neglect. You begin to realize that your role was never to be the emotional regulator for someone unwilling to regulate themselves. And in that moment, the energy returns to its rightful owner, you. Carl Jung said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And now you embody that. You no longer say, "I need peace." You live it. You no longer wish for clarity, you are it. This is emotional sovereignty, not a wall, not a void, but a knowing that says, I can love you and still let you go. I can feel deeply and still choose silence. I can see your pain and still not make it mine. This is the empathy that heals you, not just others. This is the love that turns inward, not in bitterness, but in balance. And once you've touched this kind of wholeness, you'll never hand it over again. Not to charm, not to guilt, not to loneliness. You didn't lose your heart. You finally put it back where it belongs, inside your own chest. And from now on, it beats for you. Narcissists don't just crave attention, they survive on it. But not any attention. It has to be emotional, charged, reactive. That's why they poke. That's why they provoke. Not to resolve, but to ignite. Your pain, your confusion, your over-explaining, it feeds them. It reminds them they still matter. That they still hold space in your head, your heart, your nervous system. And as long as you're reacting, they're winning. But when the empath stops reacting, when the emotional faucet shuts off, something inside the narcissist cracks, and not gently, because silence to them is not just rejection, it's erasure. They don't just fear being disliked, they fear being invisible. And your lack of response mirrors back the one thing they've spent their whole life running from, their emptiness. So they panic. First comes the rage, the sudden disproportionate anger, the insults, the cruel messages, not because they hate you, but because they can't control you. And control, to a narcissist, is love. Without it, they feel powerless, and that powerlessness is unbearable. Next comes the desperation. They might love bomb again suddenly, remembering everything you ever meant to them. They'll use nostalgia like a weapon, guilt like a rope. But it's not real remorse. It's a tactic. They don't miss you. They miss your vulnerability, your availability, your reaction. And when that doesn't work, they shift to the final phase, the smear campaign. They start telling stories, rewriting history. They become the victim. Why? Because if they can't own your energy, they'll try to own your narrative. If they can't make you stay, they'll try to make others believe you were the problem all along. But this isn't about revenge, it's about exposure. And the more they spin, the more obvious their pattern becomes. Because you've stepped off the stage, you're not playing the role anymore. And without your participation, their performance collapses. This is the unraveling, not of you, but of the illusion they built around you, the one where they were always the one in charge. And now, faced with your stillness, they don't know who they are. The panic isn't about losing you, it's about losing their mask. And there's no script for that. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires separation, not just from people, but from patterns, from illusions, from the roles we were conditioned to play. And nothing begins that process more powerfully than no contact. But let's be clear. No contact isn't just blocking a number or deleting an app. That's surface level. The real work happens underneath, mentally, emotionally, energetically. No contact is a return to self, a conscious choice to remove someone's influence from your nervous system, not out of hate, but out of healing. You stop reading between their lines. You stop scanning for clues in their silence. You stop playing detective in a mystery that was never yours to solve. And in that withdrawal, the most powerful message is sent not to them, but to yourself. Because narcissists interpret silence differently. To them, it's punishment. To you, it's protection. They'll tell themselves you're cold, heartless, overreacting. Let them. Because the silence isn't meant for them to understand. It's meant for you to remember who you are without the noise, without the blame, without the manipulation disguised as love. And here's what they never saw coming. Silence exposes them. In the absence of your explanations, their behavior becomes obvious. In the absence of your energy, their chaos stands alone. And no amount of spin can cover it up when there's nothing left to mirror it back. This silence becomes sacred. It's not passive. It's fierce. It says, I will no longer participate in my own erasure. I will no longer beg to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding me. I do not owe anyone access to my peace, my presence, or my power. And though they may try to break it through guilt, through pity, through panic, you hold the line, not because it's easy, but because it's essential. You're no longer running from the void. You're stepping into it, finally hearing the sound of your own voice again. And in that space, you remember, this is not loss. This is liberation. No contact is not the end of love. It's the beginning of self-respect. It's the boundary that heals everything the connection broke. And the quieter it gets, the clearer you become. Empaths don't just connect, they merge. They feel someone else's pain so deeply, it becomes hard to tell where the other ends and they begin. Over time, the lines blur. You don't notice it at first. You just want to help, to soothe, to love, but slowly, your identity begins to dissolve in the emotional tides of everyone else. You speak in tones that aren't yours. You second-guess your intuition. You forget what you even feel when no one else is around to feel for. This is the hidden cost of emotional fusion. It doesn't happen in one moment, it happens in 1,000 small abandonments of self. But now, something sacred begins. The return. The process Jung called individuation. A coming home to the inner self. Not the self shaped by roles, guilt, or expectation, but the self that existed before the world told you who to be. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, subtle. like waking up after a long, disorienting dream and slowly remembering your own name. You start to feel again, but now with discernment. You learn to witness without absorbing, to love without dissolving, to stay present without being devoured. That's the alchemy. You don't stop caring, you just stop sacrificing. You don't close your heart, you just choose where it opens. And with each decision rooted in you, something rebuilds, something ancient, something sovereign. You realize that your sensitivity isn't weakness, it's wisdom, that your intuition isn't delusion, it's direction. And for the first time, you're not chasing love, you're cultivating it within. This isn't about rejecting connection, it's about anchoring in your own energy before offering it to another. Because now you understand, the most dangerous thing an empath can lose is not love, it's themselves. And now that you've found yourself again, piece by sacred piece, you'll never let that go. Some people think boundaries are walls, cold, rigid, detached. But real boundaries, healthy boundaries, are anything but. They aren't about shutting others out. They're about letting the right ones in. They are not rejection. They are respect. And for the empath, they are not just helpful, they are sacred. After years of emotional overexposure, of saying yes when everything inside you whispered no, of carrying what was never yours to begin with, something changes. You stop explaining, you stop overcompensating. You simply draw a line, not to punish but to protect yourself, your energy, your peace. And suddenly, the dynamic shifts. Because narcissists don't fear losing you. They fear losing access to you, to your empathy, your reactions, your willingness to bend. And when you set a boundary, not a threat, but a quiet truth, they panic. Why? Because boundaries mean you see clearly now. You're no longer confused. You're no longer asking for permission to feel safe. You just claim it. They'll call you selfish, cold, dramatic. They'll say, "You've changed," and they'll be right. You have. You're no longer giving away your light to those who live in shadows. You've reactivated something ancient, your energetic shield. The one you were born with before the world trained you to override it in the name of being nice. And what they'll never understand is that your boundary isn't a wall, it's a door, one that opens with truth and closes with clarity. It says, "I love myself enough not to abandon me even for you." This isn't bitterness. This is balance. You're no longer available for emotional debt collectors, no longer here to soothe egos at the cost of your soul. Your compassion hasn't shrunk, it's just become wise. And that wisdom says, not everyone deserves a front row seat to your heart. So the next time someone pushes, manipulates, or guilts you for having boundaries, remember this: a healthy boundary doesn't push people away, it reveals who was never willing to meet you with respect. And that kind of clarity? That's not loss. That's protection in its highest form. Narcissists don't mourn you, they mourn the control they had over you, the ability to provoke, to confuse, to keep you tangled in their emotional web. So when you leaven, not physically, but energetically, it does something far more devastating than they'll ever admit. It unravels their identity. Because their sense of self was never rooted in truth, it was built on reflection on you. You were the mirror that made them feel whole, the supply that validated their existence. And now that mirror has shattered, not in rage, but in silence. And in that silence, they begin to collapse. They will search for a replacement, of course. They always do. Another empath, another open heart, another soul they can hook into with charm and need. But something's different this time. Something lingers. Your absence, your stillness. The fact that the storm they once summoned with ease now finds no response. They don't just miss your presence, they are haunted by it. Because your absence says something no argument ever could. You saw the game, and you walked away. That realization echoes louder than any door slam, any confrontation, any tear. It's the moment they realize they didn't just lose a source of attention. They lost the one person who reflected their highest illusion back to them. And now, without that reflection, they begin to see themselves. But not clearly. No, clarity requires truth, and narcissists fear truth more than anything. What they feel instead is fragmentation. Their persona cracks, their tactics lose power. Their identity, once propped up by your empathy, begins to sink under its own weight. This is not about vengeance, this is about reality finally catching up. And as they spiral through rage, through panic, through desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative, one thing becomes evident: your presence once kept them afloat. But it's your absence that finally sets you free. There's a moment, maybe weeks, maybe months after the break, when you catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror, and something's different. It's not your outfit, not your hair. It's something deeper, something radiating from within. It's peace. And peace looks good on you. This is the part no one tells you about the glow-up that happens when an empath chooses themselves. It's not just physical, it's energetic. It's subtle but undeniable. The light comes back to your eyes. Your smile becomes effortless. You laugh more, sleep deeper, breathe easier. Why? Because your nervous system is no longer in survival mode, because your energy is finally your own again. You're no longer shrinking, dimming, twisting yourself into knots to be palatable. You're no longer decoding mixed signals or walking on emotional landmines. That constant tension, the quiet panic you lived with, has lifted, and in its place, freedom. But this glow-up isn't just about peace, it's about power. You begin to notice that you take up space differently now. You enter rooms without apologizing. You speak without second-guessing. You trust your own instincts again. And that shift, people feel it. The ones who once overlooked you start to stare, not because of what you're wearing, but because of what you exude. Because true glow is born from alignment. When your insides and your actions finally match, when your heart no longer has to beg for safety, it already is safe. And yes, some will say you've changed, that you seem distant or different. Let them. Because the truth is, you didn't change. You returned. You're not glowing because you added anything. You're glowing because you removed what was dimming you. This is emotional freedom. Not the absence of feeling, but the ability to feel without fear, to give without depletion, to exist without justification. And now that you've touched this version of yourself, the one that thrives, radiates, commands peace, you'll protect it like a sacred flame. Because this glow, it was earned, and you're never dimming again. There's a difference between being alone and being isolated. One feels like exile, the other like homecoming. And for the empath who once feared silence as proof of abandonment, this difference becomes everything. Carl Jung wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." For years, you tried to communicate love to people who only knew control. You tried to share your soul with those who only wanted pieces of it. That wasn't solitude, that was isolation inside connection, the worst kind. But now, you've stepped away, and something strange happens. The silence that once terrified you becomes sacred. You no longer crave constant noise, constant validation, constant company just to prove you're worthy of existing. You start to enjoy your own rhythm, your thoughts, your space. You realize the peace you were begging others to offer was inside you all along. It just needed the chaos to quiet down. This is what Jung called individuation, the sacred reconnection with the true self. Not the mask, not the role, the essence. And when you meet yourself there, something softens. You stop performing. You stop proving. You stop asking, "Am I enough?" And instead whisper, "I already am." And with that knowing, the ache to be chosen fades. Because you're no longer looking to be completed. You're not a half searching for its other. You are a whole, choosing what adds not, what fills. Solitude becomes sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, you remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You're not alone. You're aligned. And the company you now keep inside and out must match that alignment, or it doesn't enter. Because being alone isn't emptiness anymore. It's freedom. And that freedom, that's your foundation now. When an empath heals, something subtle but seismic shifts. It's not visible to the naked eye. It can't be captured in a photo or measured in words, but it's felt. The frequency changes. The air around you becomes different, calmer, stronger, and certain energies, those built on manipulation, chaos, or need can no longer access you. Narcissists feel this change before you even say a word. They'll glance your way and pause. What once read as safe to exploit now reads as not available. What once felt like an opening now feels like a wall they can't see through. Not because you've hardened, but because you've healed. And true healing has an energy that confuses anyone who feeds on unhealed wounds. You're not reactive anymore. You don't chase. You don't explain your worth or negotiate your intuition. You don't carry other people's discomfort on your back. And this unnerves emotional predators because their hooks no longer land, their bait no longer tempts. You used to be an open door. Now you're a locked gate with a sign that says, "Only love that honors me may enter." This is not arrogance. This is alignment. This is what happens when you stop needing to be chosen by those who can't love responsibly. You become unshakable not because you don't feel, but because you've anchored so deeply into your own truth that external chaos has nowhere to land. They might still try. A message here, a familiar tone there, a reminder of the past, but you don't even flinch, because the version of you that was once vulnerable to that pull no longer lives here. You've evolved past the loop. The karmic cycle has closed. And your peace? It now acts as a repellent. Not because you've become distant, but because you've become discerned. Your presence no longer says, "Fix me." It says, "Meet me where I am," or "Not at all." This is the moment emotional predators realize. They cannot enter where peace has taken root. You are no longer prey. You are your own protection. And they sense it deeply. Carl Jung once said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens." And that is exactly what you've done. This wasn't just a healing, it was an awakening. Because you didn't just walk away, you evolved. For so long you thought your empathy was a flaw, that your sensitivity made you weak, that feeling so deeply was the reason you got hurt. But it was never the problem. It was the gift. The tuning fork of your soul. You weren't broken, you were attuned. You simply hadn't learned yet how to protect what was sacred. Now, you have. You see, the empath doesn't just survive the narcissist. That's not the goal. The goal isn't to crawl away from the wreckage and start over afraid, guarded, half alive. The goal is to transcend, to rise above the pattern, to become so whole, so rooted, so fully yourself, that no one can ever hijack your soul again. And that's what you've done. This isn't the kind of transformation that needs to be shouted. It doesn't need to be proven to anyone. It lives in how you breathe now, how you walk, how you no longer chase closure because you are the closure, how you no longer explain your boundaries because your energy speaks for you, how you no longer try to be chosen because you now choose yourself without apology. The old you, the one who tolerated, absorbed, overgave, she's gone. Not because she was weak, but because she laid the foundation for the woman who now stands in her place. A woman who knows the difference between connection and captivity, between intensity and intimacy, between love and control. You didn't lose yourself in the chaos, you found yourself through it, and now you carry a new kind of light, one that doesn't flicker in someone else's wind, one that doesn't dim to make others comfortable. It's steady, it's sovereign, and it's yours. So don't just survive what you went through, transcend it. Because freedom doesn't begin the day they let go of you, it begins the day you finally stop holding on. And today, you are free. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.